We are now live.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to ask for a roll call, please.
Mayor Brill Mittler.
Here.
Councilwoman Canavera.
Here.
Councilman Fine.
Here.
Councilwoman Foster. Councilman George.
Here.
Councilman Hale.
Here.
Councilwoman Kim Chohan. Special Counsel Baumann.
Here. Here.
Plan Jim Constantine.
Here.
Chris Cosenza.
Here.
Borough Administrator Jover.
Here.
All right, everyone. This meeting is called to order in accordance with the Open Public Meetings Act. Notice of this meeting was sent to the Home News Tribune, the Star Ledger, and the Highland Park Planet on November 13th, 2020, and was posted on the Borough website at www.hpborough.com and on the bulletin board of the Borough Hall, 221 South 5th Avenue, Highland Park, New Jersey, on November 13th, 2020, and has remained continuously posted as required by law. As mayor, I preside over this meeting and may interrupt, warn, or terminate a participant statement or participation in the virtual meeting if the participant statement does not adhere to the 3 minutes provided to each participant for public comment, or if the statement is abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. So tonight we will be talking about a vision for our downtown. And I want everyone to understand that what we are talking about, what we have been talking about, is not a plan, so to speak. It's taking a look at our opportunities downtown from 100 feet above to see what it is that we can accomplish in our downtown. As you know, we've been talking about downtown development since the charrettes of 2003. So this is not a new concept. What we are looking for is our economic future, the future of this municipality through redevelopment of our downtown, making it more vibrant and more vital. And at this point, I'm going to turn things over to Councilman Matt Hale, who is the council liaison to economic development. Councilman Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I appreciate everybody being here tonight. Thank you for coming out. I do want to apologize to many of you who've attended the 3 public meetings that we've had so far on this about the downtown redevelopment. Much of what I'm going to say in this opening, you may have heard before. Some of it's new, but I do know that there are a number of people, and that as we go through this long process, we're going to have many, many more of these meetings and opportunities. So I want to start with there. I'm also going to sort of start with a little bit of an apology, and as the mayor indicated, you know, where we are in this process is really, she said the 100-foot level. I might say 100,000-foot level. If anyone has had sort of a perception that shovels are going to be hitting the ground tomorrow, next week, or even next year, I wanted to apologize for that. It's my enthusiasm, I think, or our enthusiasm for this plan. If that gave that impression earlier, I do apologize. Terry's going to explain in a little bit just how far away we are from shovels in the ground, and Joe and Jim are going to do the same, our professional staff. There's many, many public meetings to go, many, many opportunities for public input and direction before anything comes close to being built. And I think that's sort of a really important framework for tonight. But I also want to point out that if we're ever going to get those shovels to the ground, we have to start. And we have to start with a vision and some guiding principles about downtown redevelopment. And our job tonight is to try and articulate some of that vision. And my role specifically is to provide some context and some of the guiding principles that the mayor and the council and our professional staff have been working under as we sort of begin this step towards a downtown redevelopment. And so those guiding principles, I think, are important. I think they frame what I hope is going to be a great picture of downtown, but it's a frame point. So what are those principles? Let's start that out. And the first one, obviously, is that anything in the downtown redevelopment ideas, anything that we communicate, has to be consistent with the master plan. The process of creating the 2019 master plan reexamination and the land use element was extensive. It was community driven. And so whatever we do in terms of redevelopment ideas has to be consistent with that community-centered process, has to be consistent with the what we heard from people at that time. I think it's important. You're going to hear a little bit more about how it's consistent from Jim, Constantine in a little bit. And eventually the planning board is going to weigh in about how consistent this is with the ideas of the master plan. We ought to be really proud of that master plan and the land use element and the process that created it, the community process that created it. We obviously need to remember that it's pretty easy to take one line out of it and one survey finding out of it and put it out of context and make any point that you want. But I do want to think overall, this redevelopment plan is, and I believe is consistent with the scope and intent of the master plan and the land use elements. And so I think that's a key overview, key guiding principle. So based on that document, what are the guiding principles that we're focused on? And the first one is actually fairly simple. It's getting more people downtown. We need to focus on how do we get more people on the avenue. We need to get people to shop, to eat, to drink downtown. And the best way to get people to do that is have them live downtown. And the central and unifying goal is to get people to live on the avenue, to spend money, to spend time on Raritan Avenue. And if we don't, it's not going to be Raritan Avenue. The road is still going to be there. There is still going to be traffic that goes through there, but the people walking along it, the people going into stores, the people going into restaurants are going to have less and less opportunities. The vacant stores that we see now are just going to grow unless there is an increase in the number of people who are coming and in Highland Park and on the avenue. It's pretty much that simple. And that's a fundamental guiding principle that we are working towards in all of this. A second guiding principle from the council and the mayor is one that I call don't be Metuchen. And the idea of this is that we can't simply mimic what goes on in Metuchen or Westfield or Summit. We can take the best of it. We can take some lessons from it, but hopefully HP always has and always will have a very distinctive flavor and character to it. We want our buildings to be distinctive. We want them to be filled with art. We want Highland Park to be Highland Park. I say this as a guiding principle, but remember how extremely early we are in this process. We're nowhere near the point of picking out architectural styles or window patterns or awning colors. We're nowhere near ready to determine the number of specific apartments of any style, pattern, or color. But it's appropriate that when we think about how the design will come out and how it will be shaped, that we do our best to retain the independence and maybe even a bit of the quirkiness of Highland Park, while at the same time modernizing, updating, and improving our downtown. So that's second. Number three, affordable housing isn't optional. We've made a commitment that Highland Park will meet or exceed affordable housing requirements moving forward. Every apartment project must recognize that affordable housing is who we are and who we want to be. It's a value that makes Highland Park Highland Park. As many of you know, we currently are meeting our affordable housing obligations, and we're on track to meet and exceed them in the coming years. That's something we ought to be very, very proud of and something that we have not done in the past. We can't go back to the idea of skirting our affordable housing obligations because it's the wrong thing to do, full stop. But we also can't do it because when we get in a situation where we are catching up on affordable housing obligations, that gives developers an upper hand about what gets built. We want to make sure that we are working with developers and we are working as strongly as we can with them. And affordable housing is fundamental to that effort. It's the right thing to do. It's the right thing for Highland Park, and it's a part of every single thing that will be built or hopefully built in any of these projects. It's simply not optional. The fourth idea that is guiding us is that we need to make sure that public space is a fundamental part of this endeavor. Having a place that is a public meeting place is central to who Highland Park is. When we originally proposed this, the ideas presented here, we had an idea for a festival street on 3rd Avenue. And the idea was that could be converted to a town square for various events like farmers markets or movie screenings. However, over the course of meetings that we've had and discussions that have been going on for the last bit of time, we recognize that in order for a town square to feel like a town square, to be a true town square, there has to be sort of a greater sense of permanence. We've listened to many of the public comments from folks saying that they want to make sure that there's a public square entity, a town square entity that is a fundamental part of it. And so one of the ideas that we're focused on and working on moving forward is about flipping the script. Instead of looking at 3rd Avenue as a street that converts to a town square, I think we need to conceptualize it as 3rd Avenue as a town square that in an emergency could be a street. And that's a fundamental change in the focus that we heard from residents. And there's a lot of work, as I said. Remember, we're very, very early in this process, and how that works, the details and the mechanisms of how that work will be decided over the next years. They won't be decided tonight, and they won't be decided next week. But I think the idea of a fundamental public square, town square on 3rd Avenue, rather than a street aspect of it, is something that we certainly are, I would argue, move towards, and certainly something that I think makes a lot of sense. We have another goal. We want to make sure that our developments meet standards of good stewardship and sustainable development. And that's sort of an easy one for Highland Park. We understand that we need to make sure whatever is built has environmental sustainability in mind. At the end of the day, we have a plan, or need a plan, that is flexible, creative, but we also have the courage we need to have the courage to try new things. We're not going to attract enough people downtown if we're a cookie cutter like Metuchen. We're not going to attract people, the mix of people downtown, if it's nothing but luxury apartments. And if we don't integrate a substantive public space into our overall plans, we're not going to be the Highland Park of tomorrow. We can't go back to the idea of what Highland Park was 25 or 30 years ago. And I think that this plan is a great step forward in that direction. I think the plan that you're going to hear tonight, or the ideas that you're going to hear tonight, really the goals have met these goals. But we're going to have a conversation about it. We've started those conversations. They're going to continue. And I hope that everyone knows that we're committed to listening to all of those, to everyone, even if we don't agree. And we're going to disagree. It's Highland Park. And of course, we're going to disagree because part of this is about parking. So we're obviously going to disagree. But the point is, that's what Highland Park is about. As long as we do that together, understanding that we're all interested in making this a better place, I think we can move forward. I'm going to just end with the idea that maybe this is not a guiding principle. Maybe this is just one other thing to throw in there. I don't think doing nothing is an option. I don't think that is, if we want Highland Park to be vibrant by 2030, we can't pretend that it's 1930 and things haven't changed. We have to do something to make Highland Park real, and Highland Park vibrant, and Highland Park usable in our downtown area in order for Highland Park to be all it can be. So that's it. Those are our guidelines. Those are our frameworks. And that's really what you're going to hear about tonight. This is an opportunity where we've started to put pencil to paper to say, this is our vision about where we think things could go. Again, we're not looking at number of apartments, the type of awnings. We're not looking at number of parking spaces. This is the step in a process that will be here for at least 18 months, if not 2 years. And there'll be time and time again for people to talk about it. Okay, so that's enough for me. I'm gonna turn it over to, I'm not gonna apologize for saying it again and again. Literally the best borough administrator in all of New Jersey. I truly believe that Terry Jover brings a sense of calm, a sense of integrity, and a sense of understanding about how to get things done that we are very, very lucky to have. And so Terry's been a central part of this whole process, of course. She's really, really good at this, both from listening and actually from doing. And so Terry's gonna give a rundown of the rest of the night and where we move forward. So I'll leave it at that and take it over to Terry.
Well, thank you, and I don't get tired of it. I make him and oh shucks, but it's very nice. So thank you, appreciate it. I'm going to share my screen just really quickly if I can find it. And can everybody see my cover slide there? Okay. So this is tonight. I'm really going to keep it brief because I think Councilman Hale has covered a lot of really good territory, and I know people want to hear the presentation and then get to the public comment portion. So just to cover that piece, although I think the mayor mentioned it already, following the presentation and any questions that may come from the council members present, we're going to have a public comment session similar to how we run all of our other meetings. So folks that are on the line know that's coming. I did want to present an updated slide because I have seen on Facebook the timeline has been presented and the timeline has shifted, and it was always a kind of a tentative goal setting timeline. But, you know, as has already been indicated, you know, a lot of this began even before this master plan update, but most recently in 2019, there were quite a few public meetings and discussions around kind of goals for downtown that a lot of this plan is implementation of. And so that can't be kind of underscored, and I believe our planner, Jim, will be explaining that as we go through his presentation. But just to give folks who haven't been at prior meetings a sense of where we are and where we're headed, the public engagement and input component, which is where we are trying to draft the plan. I've gotten a lot of questions from folks. I'd like to see the plan. And the fact of the matter is, these are the meetings we're having to inform the draft plan. So as soon as we have a draft to share, it will be made available and posted, and I'll get into that. But so toward that end, we focused initially on the stakeholders more immediate to the tracks of focus, which we'll get into in a moment. And we had those October 26th, 7th, and 8th of October. We are now at our official public meeting number 1, and where we have shifted a bit, in part because we've gotten such good feedback and areas we want to explore further, we've shifted our timeline a little bit into the new year, the 2021. So right now, we're targeting our next kind of public meeting where a plan will have been made available in advance of said meeting for January 12th at 7 p.m. That's our anticipated to be regularly scheduled council redevelopment meeting, which is what this evening is as well. I say anticipated because, as the asterisk indicates, we have not formally established our schedule for 2021, but I've cleared this with the clerk. We are fairly confident that this will be the date, assuming we meet all of our kind of targets in between. So we're now looking toward January with a draft plan for everybody to be able to inspect, and another meeting where we will kind of present probably key changes or components, and again, opportunity for comment. Another meeting on February 11th, which we believe will be the regularly scheduled planning board meeting, because it goes as part of the adoption process. It must be referred to the planning board for consistency review with the master plan. So we anticipate using some of that time for a presentation and for public comment, as is the case at any planning board meeting. So that's February 11th. And then moving into looking at March for the public hearing and the potentially plan adoption, March 2nd, at what we believe will be the first meeting, council meeting of the month in March. So again, for those of you who are really keeping track of this, just be advised that these dates may slip or may move, and we will certainly keep you as up to date as possible. But this is kind of our current thinking. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear, because I know there were some concerns about timelines, and I just want to be as clear as I can. But again, ongoing, and I really appreciated all the emails that I have gotten. I've even gotten as much as somebody sketched out an idea on paper with buildings and sent me their ideas. All of that input is welcome and will be shared with our planning team and the council as appropriate. So I just want you to know that you can continue to reach me at tjover@hpboro.com. And I try to answer as many questions as I can. And if I can't answer it, I try to forward it to someone who can. So just be advised. And just to get back to Matt's initial point, a little bit about where we are in the process, what we're trying to do here is establish the framework for future development in these areas. We're not doing the fenestration and the detail. This plan is going to be the building envelope, hopefully, of what we all feel is a good plan for Highland Park. The next phase, especially for the properties that the borough controls, like the Track C, which is the area by the farmers market parking lot, we would see a process whereby we would solicit proposals from qualified developers to respond to an RFP that we put out to see what the development community thinks of the idea and what kind of proposal they would give to us for that. But before I, put my foot into my mouth, since we have our redevelopment attorney on the line, I believe I'm going to stop sharing my screen and just, if it's okay, if I could just call on Joe to kind of give his kind of more legal and structural kind of where we are in the pipeline, if that's okay with you, before we get to the real fun, which is the show that our planners have put together for us, and then the public comment.
Go ahead.
All right, Joe, are you able to speak?
Can you hear me, everybody?
Yes, we can.
So you're going to hear this, I guess the public is going to hear this over and over again from all of us a lot. We're engaging in a process, a journey. We are not at the end zone. We're not even close to where that journey will end. Councilman Hale articulated the goals of the journey, but where that journey will take us is yet to be determined. And so what we're basically asking for the public is to embrace the journey, not the result. So we're really reaching out through this process to solicit comments, questions, concerns, input, pictures, as you described, Terry, that will inform us in the journey. So when we began the journey and decided that, that we're going to engage in this process, the mayor and the council looked to the professionals and we told them, you already tried the adopt a plan and they will come process. We did that 10 years ago and they didn't come, right? We adopted a plan. A lot of work went into that. It was probably expensive. It was pretty robust. And that plan was adopted. And then we waited and waited and waited some more and nothing happened. So this governing body said to the professionals, well, how can we do it differently this time? What's a process we can engage in, a process, not a result, that will get us a different result than what we had before? And we've advised them that in order to do that, we think Highland Park needs to become more engaged in the process. And how do you become more engaged? You become a market participant. And so that process began by, let's identify portions of the downtown that we might acquire and assemble, and then through a competitive process, put back into the market, because we can control that process. And we began that effort by adopting a bond ordinance, acquiring a piece of property, entering into a contract for another piece of property. And we're solely assembling property that we call Gateway, we've been involved in now for over a year or more. That's how we become involved, get involved. We participate in the process to make a difference for the borough. Secondly, the mayor and council came to us and they said, where might be a good place for the vision to begin? Again, keeping in mind the councilman's goals, which are wallets and people in the downtown to further the development of the downtown. Where should we begin? What parcels should we identify as the parcels to begin this vision? We looked at the entire downtown and we identified, well, a good place to start is property you already own. So let's think about that property because we own it, we control it, we can put that into the market and see what can happen there. Let's identify property that we've either acquired or can acquire. That's the gateway parcels. Let's identify property where we have active owners who are participating, and that's parcel B or 2 you're going to hear about. And then because we know that our goal is to drive development, and in order to do that, we're going to have to adequately park those new developments in order to get the density and parking. Let's find a place where we can put a garage. And we found that spot too. So you're going to hear about 4 locations that were selected through a process of trying to meet the vision of the governing body and the mayor to jumpstart development in the downtown. And that's what they are. There are 4 parcels that we identified that seem like the easiest places to start in a reasonable manner. And so the journey begins, and the journey began with the master plan that defines our goals. But the journey is literally just stepping out the door. So the first step in the journey is you got to put something down on a piece of paper. You have to sort of articulate in some way what your vision is. And that's what everyone has in front of them. That's what we're going to present tonight. But whether that'll be the result at the end of the journey is yet to be written. But that is the beginning of the process. And you have to begin somewhere. So suggestions that we're hurrying the process, or it's already been predetermined, or not being transparent, are the exact opposite of what's happening here. If we were being not transparent or ramming it down, we would already know what project we're going to build. We'd be telling you how many rooms were going to be in it. We'd be telling you what the carpet was going to look like. We don't have any of that written now. We are literally at the infancy of this process. And so I think the most important thing that the governing body, the mayor, the professionals are asking of the public and those that want to participate is embrace the process, and we'll get to a result that we can all agree on, or at least that we can all be proud of. But we don't have a result for anyone to embrace today. We don't have a predetermined solution. We just have a plan and a vision, and we need input from everybody for that plan and vision. So what you're going to hear a lot of, unfortunately, from us is we don't know. It has to be determined. We are going to figure that out in the future. That may seem unsatisfactory to many people, but that's an indication of how early we are in the process, not an indication of that we're not that we've already figured it out. It's the exact opposite. So because we're not going to have answers to many of your questions, it's because we're just beginning, and because we're being transparent, and because we're going to get everyone involved throughout the whole process. So, it may feel unsatisfying when someone says, well, have you decided how you're going to deal with this easement on X lot? Or do you know how we're going to address how many parking spaces will be in the garage? We're going to say, we don't know. And have you figured out all these things? We don't know any of that yet. And that may feel unsatisfactory, but it's the definition of being in the beginning of a process that will have a result that is going to engage the public and the stakeholders and the neighbors. And we're going to address all that together. But because we're in the beginning of the process, we're not going to have all the answers you're looking for. We're just going to have some goals, and we're just going to ask you to embrace the process. Thank you.
Well said, Joe. Thank you.
Mayor, I think it's the show's Jim's if he wants it.
Okay, good evening. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Great, thank you. And good evening.
And Jim, Constantine, and Chris Cosenza, our planning team at LRK, for those of you who are first timers.
Thank you. I'm going to share my screen so I can move through the presentation. Looks like it's this one right here. Can you see the slideshow?
Yes.
Okay. And want to start by, this is the flyer that was put together, and the sketches that you see on the left come from the master plan. That's at this point less than a year old. And really the big land use goal that we're working on is, how do we support a thriving downtown? How do we make downtown thrive more than it is? And I want to just quote one overarching statistic that really hit me. We surveyed over almost 600 people in the master plan process through an online survey. And we had hundreds of other folks that came out to our in-person workshops at the community center. When we asked people, would you like to see downtown remain the same as it is today, or would you like to see a change? And we had a whole list of possible changes, many of which we'll talk about tonight. What was really striking was only 9% of those almost 600 people said they would like to see downtown remain the same. So I think if we use that as a point, and the master plan certainly did, that the the majority of the community that certainly participated in the master plan was hungry for some change and some transformation downtown. So the 4 tracks that we'll talk about tonight, in the upper left is tract A. If you can see my cursor here, the Gateway tract that really includes 2 portions we'll talk about. Across the street, tract B sits between the former Sunoco and the Mary Venezuelan restaurant. Tract C is the site of the farmers market, a municipally owned site. And then tract D includes North 3rd Avenue from Raritan to Denison, as well as some properties flanking it, and includes a potential another strategy out of the master plan, which involved trying to think about parking from a parking management plan standpoint. And that included encouraging cooperative and shared parking arrangements and permitting off-site parking as a strategy to develop smaller properties. And that's really one of the underlying strategies tonight, is if we can park in one place, which some would argue is more sustainable, promotes a more pedestrian-oriented environment, discourages automobile orientation and extra use and vehicle miles traveled, and attracts people that want to be part of a walking, vibrant downtown. So that certainly is an underlying principle, and all the sites are within a 5-minute walk of that collective parking location. So if we look up Raritan Avenue, coming up from the river, sort of hover above and drop down into the block between South First and South Second, one of the comments that came out of the master plan from citizens was, quote, "I love the feel of our community, but the area between First and Second needs major attention." Well, we heard you, and we're focused on that. And so the Gateway area exists on the left side of the screen here. And one of the challenges, as we talked about in the master plan, is that there's numerous gaps, places where nothing has really occurred along the street except car repairs, or there's obsolete or vacant businesses and properties. There's some new construction with the former International Market that you see pictured in the back. But our master plan strategy was to custom tailor infill and redevelopment. We have small sites. They sometimes have odd shapes. How do we respond to that? And then we also have a mix of scale. And I know there were some people that we've heard from that raised questions about why things are being proposed that are slightly taller. In this block here, it's more or less 1- and 2-story buildings. If you look at the classic cleaners on the left, these are some of the cues that, as we looked at massing, were important. A very transparent and articulated ground floor storefront, some other what we call expression lines architecturally that run across the building. So if we envision what might happen on the dark for way too long gun and boat site next door, what we've visioned here is a massing of carrying some storefront transparency. There would be some commercial use on the ground floor. Some of those expression lines of the lower scale building are brought across, but then a new 4-story building steps to a 5th back from the street. And you can see the silhouettes of some folks up there in a terrace that would have tremendous views across the river into New Brunswick. We also have a little spire that tries to articulate and bring some visual focus down the avenue. And all of that would be, part of trying to take sites and take greatest advantage of these small, challenging sites. Because, for instance, this site, above looking from Raritan Avenue, actually steps down a level to the back along Denison Street. But that creates an opportunity when we look at these sites, because that lower level on Denison, what I'd like to do is advance in that area that you see the gun and boat is labeled to the building that we just showed you. By the way, in gray next to it labeled new building is the new one that's under construction, almost complete. In gray to the left, classic cleaners. And so the opportunity at this site is to actually allow a building to step down from Raritan Avenue. And that rear access on Denison is not just for service and loading and trash recycling, things of that nature, but also provides that opportunity for residents that may be living in downtown lofts to get groceries to the buildings, even though they may be parking a block and a half, 2 blocks up denizen at the proposed parking structure. As we move to the left, we have a series of other properties. The borough actually owns one of the properties on the far left, Bergen Auto, shown in orange next to Ubre's. And so there's a couple of potential assemblages here that would change what might happen in the future. And we're not as focused on this area, but here's a simple bar building that frames the street along Raritan. If we were to acquire the vacant lot behind, which is part of the cleaners, the building might extend back into more of a C-shaped courtyard. And then if the one-story garages that are related to Highland Montgomery Apartments were to be assembled and included, the building may go further back. It has potential at that point for a large enough site to possibly be a hotel or even an office building with parking under, which is what we're showing in this illustration right here. So there's a lot of potential. We know that there's a longer time to take to assemble and address those properties. But if we look at the strategy being in these blocks that people identified in the master plan as needing major attention, one of the, again, strategies in the master plan is to expand the downtown resident customer base. It also could be folks staying at a hotel or office workers as well on those other sites. And part of that would complement across the street to the right, just beyond the Merry Venezuelan restaurant up to the former Sunoco, with another proposed building on what we refer to as Tract B. And together, these two buildings, we believe from a planning standpoint, create a real gateway and a sense of arrival into the downtown. And again, one of our land use goals in the master plan was to create a sense of arrival into the community. And that's what we hope, this massing is reflecting the potential for. Again, the building on the right steps back with a terrace at the upper level. And the way that sits on the site right here on Tract B is in this configuration. Now you'll note at the back of this site, there's an alley that connects to Park Place, and we had a resident meeting a few months ago, and one of the ideas that came out was not trying to access through that alley to parking behind, but potentially to create a small pocket park that would be accessible to the surrounding neighborhood residents, and to allow this site to park off-site so that it didn't drag traffic down Park Place into an already congested area. And you see a little sketch there of both a resident outdoor area along with a potential pocket park. And there's that narrow alleyway in the upper photo, and the yard that's there today that would become that pocket park for citizens of the area to enjoy. And probably one of those little secret gardens that can make downtown living interesting. So I'd like to move up the avenue towards Tract C, which I think everyone knows fairly well. And what's proposed there, again, is a 4-story building that steps to a 5th level terrace back from the street. This is a municipally owned and controlled site. And one of our master plan strategies that we tried to address with this building here is to expand the variety of active ground floor uses, but that doesn't mean, as in the existing redevelopment plan, that everything has to be retail on the ground floor. In fact, this block is a challenging block because it's one that actually doesn't have a lot of retail. Just go forward to this slide here. There's some office use. There is the retail aspect of the bake shop next door, which really is also can be considered a maker space, but it's not one of our downtown retail blocks. And so the strategies in the master plan talked about, in addition, creative maker spaces, arts craftsperson studios, even some office uses. So what we've envisioned on the right next to the bakery, there would be some commercial space, but then across the courtyard, would be a lobby space to the street and maybe some co-working office space or a fitness room, things that would be active on the street front, but that would relate to the building. And there's another important aspect is that it brings the front door of this building clearly to the avenue and clearly to for folks that are living here that are accessing their parked vehicle out the front door, walking on the avenue a block and a half away to the structured parking. So if we look at what that site looks like in plan view, Raritan on the left, Magnolia Street on the right. And we heard concerns, how will parking work on this site? There's a small component of short-term parking off of Magnolia that allows some, again, service to the building, but the residents would be required to park in the parking garage a block and a half away. You can see where we've labeled the lobby amenity out on the street, a small public courtyard along Raritan Avenue, and then a small retail or cafe space next to the cook and the carpenter bake shop, a passageway that would run continuous through the building. So there would be public pedestrian accessibility from Magnolia to Raritan and back. And we think we've been having conversations to find out what the Reformed Church is thinking. And it could be that this could become a very dynamic resident park courtyard back here that's working from a number of standpoints to basically take this space that we're looking at right now and make it a very active, unique garden courtyard in the midst of the downtown. So the parking lot is reduced and becomes a much more park-like courtyard experience. We had also proposed some balconies off the building, and we've had some feedback from residents about concerns with views, and we're going to take all that into consideration along with setbacks on some of the adjacent properties. You can see, again, indicated out on Raritan Avenue, those rooftop terraces that provide, magnificent views up and down the avenue, and from the avenue, the ability to look up. And that's really part of the whole loft style, living in a downtown unique experience that we would hope to bring out in the opportunities of these sites living downtown. It's not for everyone, but for the type of person that really wants to be knit into the heart of the avenue and the avenue's rebirth into a more dynamic place, it can be very attractive. So this moves us up the avenue to the corner of North 3rd, where again, we have a master plan strategy to establish a public gathering space, a town square, a plaza. And so that's what's proposed here. We have included the North 3rd right-of-way along with the former Blue Horse property to the left of that, the corner location, along with what I refer to as the Denison Street parking lot that then extends out to the Bridge Restaurant site on Raritan. In between, there are some out parcels that we've colored just to try to highlight them. Basically, Provident Bank and the next 3 buildings. There's some parking behind and access to those that are important. So in establishing the public space, the concept that evolved which wasn't in the master plan, because it's really come about through this effort to try to refine the plan and get to implementation, would be to take this portion of North 3rd and texture pave it and create a plaza, the town square type concept. And what we've heard through some of our meetings so far is feedback from the public saying, don't even leave traffic on it, just close it on day one. So we do have some driveways and access that are important. And we do envision that festival street concept, not the plaza that's closed, could extend all the way back to Denison. And we do have sort of an example of that happening as a pop-up tactical response to the COVID-19 situation that we've been in with the seating on South 3rd. That's just terrific, the town tables. And so I think it's demonstrated that the public is hungry for public space that's closed to traffic, and actually ideas that have come out of this concept that we didn't start with, but it's part of the feedback we've received is, hey, maybe we ought to have North 3rd closed, leave South 3rd closed, and expand the possibilities, as you see here, for that plaza to actually occur on both sides of the street and maybe be continued in some ways with different treatments celebrated across Raritan Avenue. So we have a couple of constraints that we're aware of as well, and that some of the neighbors have brought to our attention, but we are aware of them. There are driveways on to North Third that do limit how far back we can go with the plaza closure treatment. And so that's something that we expect will be evolving with further conversations with the neighbors that are closest and adjacent to the property. And Terry's been reaching out and coordinating, setting up those follow-up meetings. So the vision for this space is really that it's texture paved. We run lights over it so that we give it a unique ambience at night, and that it would be closed to traffic so that we can have pedestrian events on there that are absolutely unique. The pictures on the bottom are of Larimer Square in Denver, which is the only street in Denver that has these lights over it and does this treatment, and it's the first historic district absolute go-to dynamic public space within Denver. And you see an example in the upper left in Princeton of the curb is removed, the bollards are used. It's that sort of shared space concept that's more of a plaza that can be, as Councilman Hale referred to, driven on in emergencies. And this is also the place to site our structured parking garage and its entrance, which we envision would have some ground floor commercial use or maybe some office or other non-residential use on the ground floor so that its presence is more pedestrian friendly. And you see that located there. So again, coming out of our master plan strategy to try to use parking management as a tool to foster redevelopment and revitalization. We have very few sites downtown that are large enough to have the geometry where you can place a multi-level parking structure cost effectively or at all, because the sites are so small and limited in dimensions in the downtown. This is one that could work, and that sort of led us to exploring this possibility at this site here. It's not being built for customers. There could be some additional employee parking that's absorbed there. Certainly the farmers market could utilize it from the plaza for some ground level parking. And one of the comments we heard in the master plan was the need for thinking about parking near major activities like the farmers market, because right now it's too fragmented. But the primary purpose is to service residents of the redevelopment sites that we have been looking at. And you can see on the left the proposed mixed-use building at the corner on the existing Blue Horse site. This is a view of it from the other side, and a rendering of what this might look like if the building were redeveloped with a sort of a landmark corner use at the corner, and even thinking through things like the blank wall on Provident Bank becoming the new screen within a activization of this plaza. This is an example where you see a restaurant at the corner, a new building, the multi-level parking structure behind, banners over the streets, new lighting, detailing, seating, flooring, kiosks, maybe a dynamic interactive high definition screen so you can move movie nights over here and have game events and all sorts of things of that nature. And in fact, other edge of campus communities, this is Eddy Street Commons in the top picture, that's game day at Notre Dame. So there's all sorts of things you can do that can allow you to leverage this space in addition to having the movies that you have now that take place down at the existing parking lot, the farmers market, the evening events that follow, the holiday lighting events that occur. It's really endless, the programming, particularly if the space is closed to traffic. And just as a scale comparison, we have on the left outlined in yellow the area where the farmers market has traditionally taken place, and then how that might be reconfigured if it were to occur at this location, at these places. And one of the ideas that, again, came out of our stakeholder meetings was, well, we could extend the North Third Plaza a little further back if we could get Provident Bank and the other 3 buildings to get access to their parking, perhaps through the garage. And so these are all things that we'll be exploring that are coming from feedback from the community as we sort of roll out the concept for exploration. So what this looks like today, looking up North 3rd from Raritan towards Denison, Provident Bank on the right, the shuttered former Blue Horse on the left. And so the idea would be to anchor it with a landmark building on the left, transform the street, add that ability for textured paving across. And this was before we went out to the public and heard, why don't we just close it to traffic from day one so that it can just be utilized for these sorts of events, markets, special activities, food truck rallies. It's really endless of what the community thinks of as unique Highland Park events, but you'll have a space, a public space dedicated that would also be reflective across the street, and high tide events could be closed all the way down towards Denison with some limited access to the parking structure in non-business hours. So again, just to give you some sense on the scale, because it can hold quite a number of people. There's an example with a band on the stage behind the screen and some tents and a food truck, which brings us to the remainder of the block. We show a proposed mixed-use building extending from the parking structure to Raritan Avenue. And then back on Denison Street, a proposed residential building that's really lining the parking structure so that it's not exposed to, the very nice residential neighborhood extending into the north side. But when you come down 3rd today, when you reach the edge of the downtown, there's really a gash, I would refer to it, in the fabric of the community with a huge exposed parking lot, and not what the master plan calls for, a mixed-use transition zone at the edge of downtown between neighborhood and the business district. And so what we've proposed with the multi-level parking structure is that it would be lined with some little ground floor at the corner, live work unit or something that's not completely residential, apartments above that then would extend down Denison. And I should mention that building next that's really meant to take the focus from the garage is meant to somewhat reflect the office building that's on the other side of the street, character and material. And then to complement the residences on the street, that liner along Denison would pick up the scale and the veranda and porch type character that's really so prevalent along Denison Street, so that it fits in and basically is a complement. We've also had some residents send in sketches with ideas to maybe provide access from Denison to the parking structure. I think we'll take a look at that. Some suggested actually letting the parking structure come out to the street. We're concerned that we think we can do something to improve the character on Denison, improve property values in the sense of a residential neighborhood for everybody on this edge of the north side as they interface with the downtown over what it is today. And so that's the completion of this block with that, again, that multi-level parking structure that would really facilitate redevelopment on all the sites that we just spoke to. So I'm going to end the presentation there and stop sharing my screen and turn it back over to Terry.
And I would say, Mayor, I think it's back to you.
Thank you. Well, Jim, Chris, and you too, Joe, if you're still in the background there. Excellent, excellent work from our professionals. Listening to what we've heard so far, and working towards something that would really enhance our downtown. So before we go into public comment, this is a council redevelopment entity meeting, so I'm going to ask my council members if they have any questions for the planner or for our development attorney.
I have one.
Go ahead, Tara.
Because these are all new construction, they will all be ADA compliant, correct?
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions from council? Okay. Then I'm going to get ready for us to open up for our open public comment session. Each speaker has 3 minutes, and our deputy clerk, I believe, is still with us, so that she will be keeping the time on this. And you can comment on any part of this plan. Again, the deputy clerk will monitor the time and will offer a 30-second warning and then indicate when 3 minutes have lapsed. Each person will be allotted 3 minutes so we can get as many people to ask their questions as possible. The session has to wrap up at by 9 o'clock. So moving forward, if you would like to speak, please raise your hand by pressing *9 on your phone keypad or select the raise hand button on the Zoom application. The Borough Administrator will announce your turn by reading out your name or the last 4 digits of your phone number. Please begin by telling us your name, first name, last name, as well as your address. Again, if you would like to speak about this redevelopment proposal, please press *9 or the raise hand button now.
All righty, we have some hands.
Okay.
I'm going to start with the first on my list. You're coming up as Tim, so please state your full name for the record and your address.
Tim, yes. I'm using a Zoom I just downloaded. Tim McKinnon, 201 South 2nd Avenue, apartment 38, Highland Park.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk long. I may ramble a little bit. I just want to thank the mayor and everybody, all the redevelopment folks who have put so much time and thought and study into this issue. And, you know, again, as I see these things unveiled over the years, I always, for the most part, like what I see. I think, you know, I think what we've dealt with in town a lot over the years is opposition to these kinds of projects. And unfortunately, what that's done is push housing off Main Street and into the little pockets where we can develop it into these larger single family home type of situations. And, you know, that it's unfortunate the public has not had the desire or the will to say, yes, let's build downtown, because people don't then like that spillover development either. So I really think, you know, brick and mortar stores, especially with COVID and everything else, are going to continue to have more and more struggles unless you have the kind of people who are living above these or half a block away that can just run down to the bakery or do this kind of thing. They don't need to run out to even Stop and Shop or even Trader Joe's. They just walk down the block and get something. And I think that kind of density downtown will not clog up our side streets, will not change the character of the town in any way, because the side streets will still have their own neighborhoods and pockets. So, you know, I just want to underscore by saying that I know we're not trying to be Metuchen. We have our own niche thing here that we're doing. We're going to do redevelopment Highland Park style, and I like that. But I do think that everyone listening today who's in the public, who's concerned about parking or schools or any of the other issues that constantly come up, I would ask you to have the one thing we haven't had in this town is had the public will to have these happen. You can have wonderful plans that people have spent years and years developing and all the hard work that goes into it. But if the public doesn't show the will to demonstrate that they support these things, it's not going to get done. So I do ask, what I've come here to say really is to ask the public and those of you who are listening to please this time around, give it a little trust, a little faith, and don't go with the normal reactions, and let's try it our way this time. And by our way, I mean me, the people who want downtown redevelopment. I would like a chance for this to try to happen, and the public will would be a very, very strong way to make this.
30 seconds.
I think I'm good. Thank you guys all again, because, you know, I don't think people understand how much
Thank you, Tim.
building and alignment goes into kinds of
Thank
things.
you very much.
All right. Next, I have Peter Spool. Please state your name to confirm it's you and your address.
Peter Spool. Let me start by thanking Matt Hale for clarifying and Mr. Constantine for giving some details. What was lacking before and what I was able to see online were details. And the devil is always in the details. And so I understand what Matt Hale said about this just being a start. I'm hoping, and I'm going to have a series of questions, but I'm hoping, and I'd like to know if at the time of the public hearing, there will be some of the important details filled in by then, because I will be distressed if they're not. One of my concerns is that there be adequate affordable housing in these units, and I'd like to know what the plan is for what percentage of affordable housing they're expecting. I like the idea of mixed housing, affordable housing, middle income housing, and even a little bit of upscale housing perhaps, although I'd like the units to be as similar as possible for consistency. I'm also wondering how the plans will be paid for and whether these units that are planned for building will be primarily rentals or will they be condos for sale. I think it's important for quite a few of them to be rentals. Again, especially when it comes to affordable housing. I wonder if, especially in the Tract A one, if the part where the garages are now, if that could provide some underground parking for residents, which would be helpful. And it's good that there's a place, if that's possible, for people to drop off things like groceries or heavy items. I wonder if traffic studies have been performed. That's usually something that you do before accepting these things. I also wonder what the expected time frame for construction and inhabitants of these properties will be. I like the idea of the tracts closer to New Brunswick to be primarily residential, and ones maybe a little further away to include perhaps some more office space. Take advantage of the train situation in New Brunswick.
30 seconds.
Some of the affordable people who inhabit affordable housing may not be able to afford or want to make the expense of having a car and depend on public transportation. That's why proximity to the train station in New Brunswick would be important for them. Can I get some answer to those questions?
So I'm going to ask either Jim Constantine or Joe Baumann to address some of your questions, but just before I do that, I think what we were trying to express in the beginning, Peter, is the reason we don't have a lot of specific answers is because this is a vision and not an actual concrete plan that a developer has come to us with. So some of the questions, I know it's some of us are impatient to hear, exact answers to these things. We're not going to have some of those. What I can tell you is that the borough has an ordinance that requires a certain percentage of affordable housing in any new development. If it's a rental, I believe it's 20% affordables, and
The other way around, 15.
Okay, so it's a rental, 15% affordables, and if it's for sale units like a condominium or a co-op, it's 20% rentals.
So it would be good to shoot for more, given that you have more leverage now.
We can
and to make that part of the plan and be much more firm with developers this time, since they took advantage of us in the past.
Yes, they did take advantage of us in the past, and we can thank the courts for that. But I do think there are opportunities to address affordable housing in many different ways downtown. to your point. But as far as specifics to some of your questions, I don't know, Jim or Joe.
I can.
Okay,
Sure.
go ahead, Joe.
Yeah. So, Mr. Spool, yeah, like I said early, it'll be somewhat unsatisfactory to people to hear that we don't have answers to lots of your questions. I can tell you a couple things. As stated, we're definitely going to be requiring affordable housing. That's non-negotiable for every project. Things like how big a building will be is all to be determined. I can tell you, you asked about, rental versus for sale. If we were doing this project today, all likelihood it would be mostly rental, but I'm absolutely seeing in the marketplace a renewed interest in for sale opportunities for people too, as people flee from the cities to New Jersey, New York, and Philadelphia in particular. But that's sort of like a game time actual project a couple years from now to be determined decision. And in terms of when it will actually see a shovel in the ground, I think we're probably a couple years from that, sir. We're probably a couple years to actually see a shovel in the ground. There's a lot to be done between the vision that we're discussing today and an actual project that we've negotiated with a developer.
Thank you, Joe. Okay, let's move on to the next question.
Looks like I have Forsberg up next. Looks like I'm getting a message using an older version of Zoom. I'm warning Forsberg that I'm promoting you to panelist, which may trigger your video, so be prepared. I will shut it off as soon as I can. I'm speaking from experience there. Okay, good. It didn't happen. Are you there? And could you state your name and address? And it looks like you are there. Sorry about that. You moved around on my screen. Can you please state your name and address?
Okay. Mary Forsberg, 317 Denison Street. I have to start off by saying that you have made some changes that are certainly better than the previous plans that you had. But the thing that I'm finding really interesting in this is that you've made some fairly significant changes to everything but D, and in a nice way for everybody but the people who live in Tract D. You are expanding the Festival Street. The parking garage is still there, and you're talking about now putting commercial or retail space in the first level. So does that mean you're going to be building a taller parking garage? And what I find really interesting is that, you show, like in particular on Track A, and I've looked at all of these tracks very carefully. On Track A, there in the 2006 plan, there was actually a pretty attractive rendering of what could be there, which included all the parking that was necessary for that area. And I don't understand the whole notion of having to have a massive parking garage here. I had some conversations with Matt, and I wanted him to, explain to me or prove to me that this plan really makes sense to put a whole lot of people on Raritan Avenue and to improve density. The density of Highland Park is almost 8,000 people per square mile. And the research that he sent me was Seattle, which is nothing like Highland Park, 5 cities in Missouri with populations of over 100,000 to 500,000, with population densities of significantly less than Highland Park. All of the studies were totally inappropriate. And I still want to know where. Tell me a small town like Highland Park that really and truly has developed a parking garage that has enhanced the downtown. I find it very hard to believe. I recently, today I filed a request under the Open Public
30 seconds.
Act for the minutes of the Redevelopment Authority for August and October. And I was told that they have not been prepared and or that they have not been approved. And I think it's very important for people to know, since says Track D has never been part of a redevelopment plan before and was not in the redevelopment plan, the master plan in 2006 or 2019. And all of a sudden, Denison
Time.
Street, Festival Street, and the parking garage.
Thank you, Mary.
Just bear with me. I'm muting. I'm trying to figure out how I put her back. I don't want to, sorry, it's a tricky thing when people are using older Zoom. Just give me a moment, Mayor, I'm sorry.
While you're doing that, Terry, I might direct the public to Cranford, where not a significantly different sized town, where a parking garage on the south side completely changed the dynamics of that downtown in a very meaningful way.
Thank you, Joe.
I'm gonna, just because I'm scared if I remove Mary from the panel, that it will remove her from the meeting and she won't be able to rejoin. So we'll just have to leave her on the screen there for those of you, just so you know what's going on. But she's now muted. Next I see Hava Friedenreich. I am unmuting you. Please state your name and address, please.
Hi, Hava Friedenreich, 62 Grant Avenue, Highland Park. Thank you guys so much for the information. I really appreciate the reassurance that Matt started with, that this is very, very, very preliminary, because it kind of eases our minds about all the details that we're going to get to find out gradually over the course of the next couple of years. I think this is really exciting. I'm not a city person, and I really don't want Highland Park to get too much of a city feel, but I do understand that this is a desirable alternative to a empty, dying Main Street. So I will understand that, and I look forward to seeing how this develops. Thank you guys so much for your hard work.
Thank you, Hava.
Thanks. All righty. Looks like I've got Amy Livingston up next. Please just state your name and address.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Amy Livingston, 229 South Avenue and South 11th Avenue, sorry. We've been observing over the past year or so the construction of the building that's going where the International Grocery used to be. And every time we pass by it, we're thinking, well, it's a nice building, but what's actually going to go in it? Do they have a tenant lined up, or are they operating on the principle that if you build it, they will come? Because I'm not certain that's true, given that we already have a lot of empty retail space in Highland Park and nobody's coming to that. And so my chief concern about all these new buildings is, do we have a plan to actually get them filled once they're constructed and to attract new tenants, both for the residences and for the business retail space? In particular, I'm concerned about the fact that we're apparently putting in a lot of new housing with no on-site parking, and I'm not sure who is going to want to move into an apartment that doesn't have on-site parking. I've lived in a space like that before. I would not voluntarily do it again. So I wondered if we had some kind of study or some kind of evidence to show that people will in fact be willing to do that.
All right, so I'm going to ask either of our professionals, Joe or Jim, if you'd like to address the concern about off-site parking. Jim, are you not?
Sure. So there is housing in downtown Princeton that has off-site parking. There's some housing in downtown Metuchen that has off-site parking. And Rahway has had a program for quite some time, one of the oldest in New Jersey, called Payment in Lieu of Parking, where they have allowed for some of the development downtown to utilize the public parking garages within 1,000 feet or so of the sites. So there are numerous other examples. I can just tell you personally, I've experienced living in 2 of those downtowns in locations where I did not have on-site parking and walking to it. And I know I wasn't alone. It was just part of that lifestyle choice that is not for everyone. But I think it goes back to the whole point of it may get you people that I believe are more downtowners, people that really want to live, not use their car very often, or maybe don't have a car at all, and walk and use transit. more as a lifestyle choice.
Thank you, Jim.
Mayor, if you mind, can I jump in on one point?
Sure.
Just, I heard Amy mention the concern about the retail space more generally, and that is definitely something we're taking into consideration. And Jim hinted at that when he talked about the I guess, Track C site, where we're trying to figure out how to activate first floor space, but maybe not over budget for retail space, because we don't want to poach from the existing spots in town. But we also recognize there may be some openings for new retail spots that aren't currently available for whatever their configuration or needs are. But that is definitely in our thinking on this, and I appreciate the point being raised.
Yes.
Right, and Jim also mentioned about one of the buildings near the bakery where we would be looking at alternative uses for ground floor other than all of the space being devoted to retail, and there may be other options. Somebody before came on and talked about the track that's nearest to New Brunswick. It might be a good location for office space on the first floor. And those are all things that we need to be open to.
Right. And it's also recognized, Mayor, in the master plan, because we realize if you followed the prescription in the current redevelopment plan, you would just have too much retail space. And in fact, there's been also a right sizing and a tightening of any of the non-residential space on the ground floor in our conceptualization of these tracks.
Thank you, Jim.
Okay, going to the next. It's a phone number. So the person whose last four digits are 4445, I am unmuting you. And hopefully you can unmute yourself and state your name and address. 4445.
Hi, Lois Lebbing here, 100 North 2nd Avenue.
Hello.
Hi. I wanted to point out a little bit of what's been mentioned. It was the 1988 Master Plan, page 86, that suggested the consolidation of small land parcels over here near your Gateway, Tract A. Because of the 15-foot embankment on Denison Street, Tom Sheehan suggested you consider subterranean parking, and excluding that, the building would be for a substantial medical professional office building with no retail. This, I think, is important usage on this facility so as not to compete with existing retail along the central business district. Now, I just heard today, moving forward into 21st century, NBC News this morning, 11-ish, had showed that Walmart has an 80% online increase in business, and Walmart does not expect that online business to fall much once the virus is gone, because who wants to wait in lines is what is going to be the habit. And also a 2020 documentary on the pandemic at NHK Japan's station on TV showed that Silicon Valley in California is emptying out. The tech homeowners are selling and buying RVs and houseboats and yachts. They are not seeing themselves in elevators. They don't want to be crowded with the public. So why not, on your master plan, think about developing Red's Marinas area, since Raritan River was dredged not so many years ago. Allow the houseboats to park there if that's in demand. And last for tonight, I challenge all of you to shop tonight at the grocery store here in town and walk home or walk to Borough Hall, park 3-4 blocks away in this freezing, windy weather. It's not winter yet. Do it in the hard rain or in the heat of the summer. Millennials may indeed walk home from New Brunswick's train station, but once they're home, they're going to order takeouts. They're not going to call Peapod Stop and Shop, and you're going to put Stop and Shop right down the drain. If you don't think through this, please think from every direction about your plan instead of creating a dead end for the town. And I just
30
point out
seconds.
The administration a few years back asked us, back in Merrill's time, to please put up bird feeders, feed the birds. So now I have squirrels and possums and raccoons. And last week, fox visited twice, November 5th and 6th. We had the deer here constantly. So I can stop, but not in the winter, stop feeding the birds. But you have to think further about what you're doing in the big picture. I know you're trying, and we need something to
Time.
brighten up this. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois. Next.
All right, another phone number to the person whose last four digits are 9396. 9396, you are unmuted. Please state your name and your address. I think you're muted on your end. There you go.
Hi, my name is Debbie Petrisco. I live at 113 North 3rd Avenue, and I am not in favor of a parking garage in Highland Park at this spot. I agree with what everyone says about people not walking, just human nature. But North 3rd is not a cut-through street in Highland Park. North 2nd, people zoom up. North 4th, people cut back over Madison. North 3rd has been a very quiet street. This is going to push traffic in directions that, we haven't seen. Also, what about walking school bus? Now you're going to have a parking deck. What happens when the kids get out of school? There's just a lot of things that need to be taken into consideration. And just a parking deck is ugly. I don't care what you do with it. It's just ugly. That's all I've got to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Go on, Terry.
Yep. Sorry, if I don't lower the hands as I go, it drives me crazy. Sorry. Nora Krieger, you're up next. I've unmuted you.
Hi, Nora Krieger, 19 North 6th Avenue. I had a bunch of comments. I was at the early sessions at the community center, but some of the things that came out of that seemed to be different than what I experienced there. I wanted to talk first about the parking. I have to agree with Lois Lebing. People are not going to carry all those groceries home, and it's going to become very difficult. Also, I am not young, but even the youngsters, everybody in New Jersey has cars. That's what I really wanted to say. We have cars because we're not New York City, and we're not Philadelphia, and we're not Seattle, and we're not Denver. And what I mean by that is that we don't have a coordinated public transportation system to get people around. We don't even have a shuttle that goes around town, which I know that Merrill wanted to see in town and in one of the plans going way back. So I like the idea of a public space, but a parking garage on North 3rd seems like an odd place for it. It would seem to me that if there was room to put a parking garage nearer to the bridge, then, but of course that would mean you need to have parking for the apartment buildings, which I think you do. Also, there's deliveries. People have a delivery coming in a lot of places, including New York City. They have a circular driveway. Somebody drives up, there's a cart you can bring out, you put your things on it, and then it goes into the building, you park your car, and then you're able to take it up to your apartment. I hope that you'll also consider the balance between rental and ownership, because people who own a property have more stake in the town and what happens to the town. It's less transient. As for the business offices, they're not, I've read a lot saying they're not sure if all that office space stuff is going to come back so readily. We've lost so many stores to the pandemic. I believe the pandemic has had a tremendous effect on the stores in town, and we really need to—
30 seconds.
Okay. Did I get to everything? So setbacks for those buildings, they look like they take up the entire property like a big block. And that, to me, that's not very good. And I hope that when you get developers, you'll give them, there'll be some requirements that they have to meet so that they can't just come forward with a plan that they think will bring them the most money. I'm done.
Thank you, Nora.
Okay.
Mayor, if you could humor me one moment, I just wanted to mention one of the pieces of information that came out of the master plan process that I thought, based on one thing Nora mentioned, Highland Park does have, relative to the rest of the state, and I'm not even sure where else, a very low car ownership ratio. I'm using probably the wrong language, but I know that's something that we unearthed when we, relative to other places, I'm not disputing that people have cars, but relative to other places, and a lot of people who are single car households. So that's just a point I'd like to make as something we keep in mind as we talk about that. Next up, Carl Prey. I have allowed you to speak. Please state your name and your address.
Carl Prey. Sorry, we're getting feedback. Sorry. 317 Denison Street. I just wanted to ask about two things. One is something that was brought up earlier and in a list of questions, and that was about how things are going to be financed. I understand there's we're starting out with a $5 million, I don't know, money that came from bonding or something like that, that's sort of to be used to begin the process. But then I'm sort of wondering, you know, where the money is going to come from and how that's all going to work. And then the other thing, which is kind of different, is at the end of the process in the end of this planning process, what do we end up with? We end up with a plan that's been approved, and what does that plan really do? I mean, does it say that okay, we've got these 4 blocks that we're going to develop them, and we're going to and this gives the borough the authority to go ahead and talk to developers and stuff like that? I'm not exactly sure what the end of the process of this particular planning process is, and what does that give does it give the developers some, I don't know, hope that, you know, that they can develop stuff in Highland Park, or does it put restrictions? It seems like everything has to be negotiated again afterwards. So anyway, I'd like some clarity on just what it means in March if this plan gets passed. What does that, you know, what does that do actually?
So there were 2 questions I heard from.
We can't hear you.
From you. One is about.
We can't hear Gail.
Oh, am I?
No, we can hear you. I think the issue is on your end.
Can't hear you.
Hello?
Oh, okay.
Can you hear now, Carl?
Carl, if you and Mary are in the same place, you might want to hang up the Forsberg one. I'm wondering if the 2 things are conflicting.
Okay.
Hello? Gail, I would just keep going, and it's being recorded, and he can.
So the first question was about the bond ordinance. So Matt, you mentioned the ordinance in your earlier remarks. Do you want to remind everyone about the bond ordinance?
Terry, we can't hear anything.
Carl, can you hear me?
And I'm frozen.
I'm sorry, the trouble is on your end.
Yes.
But for everyone else, so they can hear the answer to the question, the mayor and the council approved a bond ordinance several years ago to allow the municipality to purchase properties. But Matt, did you want to talk a little more to that?
I'm happy to. It was in 2015. There was a bond ordinance passed that allowed council to let bonds for about, I believe the total is about $6 million. Since that time, that has been sort of judiciously used in purchasing a number of different things, including the Bergen Auto, but also the teen center and the refurbishing of the teen center, and another and 212 Raritan was another piece. And so the goal of that ordinance, as I think Joe was the one who mentioned it earlier, is that when Highland Park is able to have skin in the game with developers, we're in a much better position to actually control the fate of some of that development. And so the process that the council at that time in 2015 decided to move forward with was to have this bond ordinance that would allow for an attempt to consolidate some of these properties so that we could move in this direction. So I think that covers it in general about the financing. So
Thank you, Matt. And then Jim or Joe, would either one of you like to sort of elaborate a little on the process here? The question, I believe, was after the plan is approved, what are the next steps? How do we get developers interested? So,
right.
Okay, Joe.
Yeah, so I'll answer it. So the purpose of the plan is to set, I've used the analogy before of the piece of marble. And so the plan is going to set the size of the piece of marble, how big it is, how, the shape and size of it, but it's not the actual sculpture. And so the borough determined to go on a path where we would control our own destiny. What I mean by that is, if we acquire and assemble the property and then through an RFQ process, a competitive process, we would put the property out into the marketplace, identify what we want to happen to it, and let the market compete for the right to buy our property and develop it in our vision. That's a lot easier to do than going to a property owner and trying to convince them to do something with their property that we want them to do. So in the case of both the Gateway, where we're slowly buying and assembling the property, and in the case of the farmer's market lot, our expectations, once we adopt the plan, which is the zoning, so what you can and can't do, we're going to develop an RFQ and an RFP, and we're going to solicit the development community to make proposals to us. And that RFP will also go through a public process. It'll be available to anybody that wants to see it. And we'll outline exactly what we want to have built on the property, and we'll ask people to compete on the price they'll pay for our land, what incentives they may or may not do, what their vision would be that is consistent with our vision. And so the next step in the process is that competitive process where we put our property out into the market. That applies to two of the sections, and that ultimately ends up in a redevelopment agreement, which is a contract, and a purchase and sale agreement, which is a contract between Highland Park and that bidder on the property, who successfully maneuvers their way through a competitive process, and we select them also through an open competitive process. The two other parcels are owned by private parties, and the plan will set what they can build there, but they'll still have to negotiate redevelopment agreements with us. It's just that we're going to have to, they will own the property, and we don't have quite the amount of control in terms of dictating to them. It's going to have to be more of a cooperative process, and that applies to lots B and D. But the end result is a negotiation between all property owners, whether it's through a competitive process or existing, of a redevelopment agreement that gets a project built that that the Highland Park can feel proud of.
Thank you, Joe. All right, let's move on to the next question, Terry.
Next person is Gerald Pomper. I have unmuted you. Please just state your name and address for the record. You have to unmute yourself.
Am I coming through now?
Yes, you are.
Okay, I'm Jerry Pomper of South 3rd Avenue. I'm very encouraged, actually, to hear this. I haven't heard any of the concepts before, and I think the idea of buying property and then negotiating with a developer is a very good fulcrum to use. And I think the basic concept of focusing on downtown redevelopment is certainly critical. It is very sad to walk on Raritan Avenue, and every time I do, which is unfortunately more than I want to because of the virus, I can't do anything else, I see empty store. And so I'm glad you're moving ahead, and this is a good concept in general. But I spent 2 to 4 years on the zoning board, 2 years on the redevelopment agency, and we accomplished, the zoning board did some things because it had to. The redevelopment agency didn't accomplish anything despite Mickey Landis's great leadership, in part because it was subverted by the planning board and by the borough council, which really didn't want to have their powers infringed on, I think. And our one project that came finally around was the redevelopment of the Sunoco station and the selling of it to a 7-Eleven store. And there were conflicts of interest on the planning board of some of the people who were voting there. There was not a dispassionate consideration in my view. And I think it was a very elitist kind of position. We heard comments like, why can't we get a Banana Republic here instead of a 7-Eleven? Or who wants a 7-Eleven? We want a fancy place like a Starbucks. Now, unless we understand that we're trying to develop a small city here and not a big mall and not a big city, and it's not a neighborhood of New York and so on, the same kind of elitist position is going to subvert this. So what I really want, and I don't know you, Mrs. Jower, so I don't know the present membership of the planning board, but until the planning board gets to be tolerant,
30 seconds.
it has to, this will end up as another failure, even though a well-prepared failure. I wish you the best of luck.
Jerry.
Okay, next.
I've got David Hughes up next. I've unmuted you. Please state your name and address.
Hello, yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Good. David Hughes from 330 South 3rd Avenue, Jerry's neighbor. So I support this pedestrian-friendly development. I think it's been a long time coming. I do think that human nature, it's in our nature to walk. Lois, who believes otherwise, is not aware that the human species is much older than the motor vehicle. And so I think this is the wave of the past and the wave of the future. 2 comments about the pedestrian development. I hope that under no plan are you going to increase the driveways on Raritan Avenue. We need fewer of those. They are one of the things of good. I see heads nodding. Great, you get it. Somebody who was actually critical of pedestrian development, though, made a good point a little while ago. I think this needs to be integrated with a transit plan because the people who move into these apartments are people like me who drive infrequently, who walk to the supermarket and so on. We're going to need dedicated bus lanes on Raritan Avenue to get rid of the parking on Raritan Avenue and replace it with bus lanes or bus and bike shared lanes so that the buses, the 2 bus routes running through Highland Park, you could double the frequency. And people could really get to New Brunswick and to the train station regularly and reliably on a bus that ran every 15 minutes. So that's the way to attract these perhaps younger people who want to live in the 6th borough of New York here. 3rd point, the only opposition people have really raised has to do with the parking structure. And I understand that parking structures are not attractive. In fact, they're dreadful buildings for 3 reasons. The concrete has a huge carbon footprint. If concrete were a country, it would be the 10th most polluting country in the world for CO2 emissions. Parking lots, parking decks tend to be unsafe because they're empty. A lot of sexual assault and muggings and so on happen there. And per square meter, parking garages create almost no employment. They're a terrible land use. So you can mitigate all those problems by doing one thing, by making it a job-creating garage, which is where you cut the floors in half, you make it 2 stories instead of 4 stories, you double the density of cars, you pack them in there, and you hire valets, unionized valets, to park the cars. Because we're talking
30
about
seconds.
Apartments who won't be using the cars very often, so it won't inconvenience them very much to rely on a valet. They can text from their cell phone when they're leaving their door and ask the valet to have the car ready. Valet is a fancy word. I just mean a car parker as a job. And so basically, instead of spending your money on concrete, which destroys the planet, you spend your money on hiring people who park cars for a living and have good, decent jobs in Highland Park, and then go have dinner in Highland Park after work and live in Highland Park. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
It looks like we have Randy Solomon up next. You're unmuted.
Hi, everyone. Randy Solomon, 331 Felton Avenue. And I'm someone who, I'll note, walks to Stop and Shop frequently, pulling my little red wagon to go shopping, and look forward to the opportunity to use my legs in these COVID times. But so I want to talk about a few things. So one, this first speaker, Tim, he kind of enjoined everyone to support this because people haven't supported development in the past. And I just want to note that the opposition to development has been not to downtown development, but to development that's kind of in the hinterlands, that's away from the downtown and hasn't been very beneficial. There's been pretty uniform public support for downtown development in Highland Park for as long as I can remember. And the old redevelopment plan had a tremendous amount of support and had a big public engagement process. So I think people will argue about some of the details, as they should, but the idea of downtown redevelopment, I think, enjoys really broad support. I was a member of the redevelopment agency as well, and it wasn't lack of public support that I thought killed a lot of the development that needed to happen. It was the fact that the town wasn't playing an active role in solving the problems that needed to be solved to make that development happen. And I'm really happy to see that the town is actually now doing that. And so I want to thank all the public officials that are sticking their necks out to do it. You're going to hear a lot of negativity. And as a politician, as a public official, it's always easier not to take on something controversial, even if you know in your bones it's the right thing to do, because someone's going to, there's always going to be opposition. And so when they actually do it and they take a risk, I think they deserve, praise. And so I'm praising you. I want to talk about the parking deck. One of the big problems that we faced was that all these little parcels. Highland Park doesn't have any big lots to develop. They've got all these tiny lots, and you try to assemble them as best you can, but it's almost impossible because there's so many owners and not everyone wants to sell. And so then you have to shoehorn things in, and to shoehorn in a building that's worth building and all the necessary parking that it needs really proved to be one of the critical obstacles to us getting anything done. And we just couldn't get anything built and to manage all the car storage. And so this parking garage is the solution.
30 seconds.
This garage enables us to have the parking somewhere and then have buildings somewhere else close by that are large enough to actually be built and to attract a developer. I also want to say, I think I love the location for the town square. I think it should be bigger. I'm not sure it works on both sides of Raritan. I don't know if it can accommodate the farmers market in one spot. I think would be important, but I definitely think you're on the right track.
Time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next person.
Looks like Jonathan Lerner is up next. You're unmuted. Please state your name and address.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Lerner. I live at 228 Magnolia Street. And I'd first like to say, back in 2006, I guess, was the last time the borough went through this whole process. And I attended the meetings then as well. And I'll never forget, somebody stated, there was a gentleman in town that ran the planning board, I guess, in the 50s or 60s. His name was Ralph Voorhees. And his greatest regret on being a member of the zoning board or the planning board or whatever handled it was allowing the building of the Parktown apartments on Raritan Avenue as you drove into Highland Park. Because here you are driving into town, and you talk about the gateway into Highland Park. The gateway was now this big monolithic 5-story brick building, which is fairly unattractive. Actually, it's 2 buildings, I believe. And the plans that we're seeing put in front of us now basically are 4 of those, or you can also equate it to the Ansonia on the corner of 5th and Raritan, and dropping 4 of those in the center of town, 2 on Raritan between 2nd and 3rd, and 2 between 1st and 2nd. And if a private developer came to the town with any of these projects without the creation of on-site parking or convenient parking, there would be zero chance of it happening. So with that being said, I'd just like to make a couple comments with regards to some of the things that were said tonight. With regards to the attorney who spoke about the lack of involvement by the Borough Council in 2006, I think that you're mistaken there. I don't know if you were involved in the process or around when that happened, but they had plans, they had developers knocking on doors, looking to buy property. They had a lot of sketches like we've seen today, but the financial meltdown came along and it killed all possibilities of investment in the town at that point. So I don't think it was a lack of interest, in the council or the town. With regards to a couple comments made by the planner tonight, you spoke about the Eddy Street Commons, and I just did a quick search, how that might be comparable to this Festival Street and having people, go to football games afterwards. The Eddy Street Commons is literally 7/10 of a mile from Notre Dame football stadium. So I really don't see that location being conducive to
30 seconds.
People driving to or walking to Rutgers Stadium. And I'd also like to ask, you said that the people that would be buying these apartments would be required to park in the parking lots a half a block away. And I was wondering how you would enforce such a requirement.
Okay, Jim, do you want to take that one?
Sure. There would be, well, first of all, on the potential for the Rutgers football party, would be shuttling them from the garage location to the game. But on the parking, there would be lease requirements requiring that people park at the garage. That's where it would be in their lease if they had a rental apartment.
And how do you enforce that? If somebody parks on the street or parks on Raritan Avenue or parks at Magnolia Street, how do you, it's public parking, it's street parking. How do you enforce that?
So I'm going to interrupt for a second here and then let you answer. But part of what the overall plan as we move forward, and Matt Hale and I were talking about this just today or yesterday, is to, at the same time, look at some of the parking studies and work on a parking plan in coordination with all of this. And that may include different things like resident parking, what we're going to do with parking on the street in downtown on Raritan. All of that has to get looked at. Jim, you can, sorry for interrupting you, but go ahead, Jim.
Well, and that's what's in the master plan is the structure that we had there was really in terms of leveraging redevelopment, but the recommendation, the strategy for downtown in the master plan is to prepare a parking management plan that evaluates everything holistically, because right now you basically have an unmanaged parking situation on street, in private lots, in the limited amount of public parking downtown, and communities that have successful downtowns generally have a higher level of management, and it's always changing. It's not that you do the plan once, you're constantly tuning it and responding to new issues.
Well, would it make sense to have that done prior to or as part of this planning process and not after the planning process?
So, Jonathan, we're out of time on your question, but the answer is it probably does make sense to use at the same time, and Matt Hale is going to be talking further about that as we move along with this. Okay.
Looks like we have Matt Hirsch up next. State your name and address, please.
Thank you, Terry. Hi, it's Matt Hirsch, 333 Felton Avenue. Thank you so much for this presentation. I wanted to just echo Hava Fredenreich, who said that this brings great excitement to the downtown, and I just have to agree. And also, I agree with Ms. Krieger's comment about a kind of a robust transit element. I know the mayor and council have been looking into a jitney of some sort and have made progress along those lines. But I think it's, I mean, I know you agree that any kind of development like this goes a long way when there's a shuttle involved. I just wanted to point a couple things out. Somebody mentioned the 7-Eleven development that was heard about 8 years ago. I attended every one of those planning board meetings in 2012. The proposal was approved. There's a strange misconception out there that it was somehow denied, that the town denied it. The town did not deny it. The town approved it. Conditionally, it was the developer that backed out of that plan because they did not want to budge from their position that cars had to drive over Raritan Avenue sidewalk to enter a building where parking faced the street. And obviously, if you look at things like Rite Aid, you know, downtowns now do it a little bit different. They put the parking in the back to make development on the sidewalk, to make it more pedestrian friendly. Because anybody who walks between, I have 3 small kids, and we go on bikes a lot. Anybody who walks, you know, downtown knows that the area between 1st and 3rd, you know, can generally be very, very hostile. It's not easy. It's not easy walking. If you're walking around, especially with little kids who are running up in front of you or who behind you or on bikes, it's not a, you know, it's not really a safe spot. What Mr. Constantine is proposing would add additional vibrancy, economic and social vibrancy, would add a sense of place to a downtown that desperately has a place, and the one that we all can envision in our minds, and would add additional foot traffic, and subsequently, I think, business livelihood and life to our downtown. I just want to remind people that you can't close the door on your community once you're here. So that's why I think, you know, housing downtown is really important, but then affordable housing is also exceptionally important. So I look forward to, you know, any proposal coming in having that element.
30 seconds.
And we just have a, you know, we have a philosophical and cultural commitment to walkability downtown. You know, shops downtown offer employment, places for not only some summer work for high schoolers, but also year-round work for many of our residents. And every time that we've opened the downtown for anything, whether it's the town tables, whether it's Oktoberfest on North 4th, whether it's the street fairs, it is a wild success. Whether it's the outdoor movie theater, people will sit on gravel. Thank you, Jennifer. People will sit on gravel, 400 people strong, to do an outdoor movie theater. It's just, there's so much possibilities. Thank you for this.
Thank you, Matt.
Mayor, I just wanted to point out it's 8:53 and we probably have about 15 more hands raised, so I don't know how you want to handle it.
Let's take the next 5 people. You know, I can't keep us on till midnight. So, and anyone who doesn't get a chance to ask a question, they will be able to send their question in to Terry Hover, as she gave you her email address, and we will get back to you. So Terry, let's go with the next 5 people, council members and professionals. I hope you're okay with staying a little bit past 9 o'clock.
Yes, Mayor.
Okay.
All right, next up is Mr. Castro. Please state your name and address, please.
Yes, Marcos Castro, 432 Montgomery Street.
Hello.
I'll start by saying that I appreciate what you're doing. I think that thinking about the future is always a great idea, and having a vision and a plan is definitely the way to go. So that said, I do have 2 concerns with the plan as presented. One is with the parking. I do agree with the prior caller that people may not park in the parking garage unless you have a mechanism to enforce that. I think, you know, especially if you're charging them for parking, they'll probably start parking out on the nearby streets and competing with the neighbors for the few parking spaces on the streets. You know, I go through some of that now. Some of the neighbors in the apartment building 2 blocks from my house, every once in a while, they're parking in front of my house. So that's one concern. Concern number 2 is with the closing of North 3rd. I think that that's an access street for some of us on the north side. I think that it's going to create traffic problems. I think that the traffic study would help But definitely, I don't think for a town where 99% of the people are drivers, I don't think it's a good idea to close the street and give up an access road to our houses. I think that's going to be extremely inconvenient for us. Now, somebody said, well, you know, a lot of people agree with it and they like it. They like the idea. I would suggest you go to tell those people we're going to shut down your street and see how enthusiastic they remain about the idea. Those were my two concerns. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next caller.
David Copperman, you've been unmuted. Please state your name and address.
Hi, David Copperman, 120 Hill Street. So we are at the 100,000 foot level, and I would implore you all that we start drilling down to some numbers in rapid order to give us an idea of the scale of what you're all talking about. From the presentation tonight, I have a very clear impression that the number of multi-resident dwellings that we are looking at will exceed, possibly greatly, the numbers that are presented in the PowerPoints on the 4 tracks. For example, the building that would replace the restaurant, the Blue Horse, and others that were shown in the slides here. I would greatly like to get an idea of the scale of what we're looking at, the number of new units, the number of people, and yes, indeed, the number of cars, and whether all of these new units are going to have the requirement that householders there park in the famous 300 parking garage. The plans, as presented in the October slides, already indicate more households planned on the 4 tracks than the number of spaces in the parking garage. And now again, from tonight, it appears that we're looking at indeed more. So I would really ask that these not be presented so broad brush and descriptively, but that we start to see some numbers in order of magnitude, if you will, not precise, they're not going to be, but as soon as possible, what scale of increase are we looking at in terms of units of residents, of people, people and vehicles. And then, of course, from there, you have the whole question of the enforcement problem. Ms. Jover, you made the assertion that Highland Park is actually a relatively low-density vehicle ownership town. I'm very surprised to hear that. I would love to know if it's true or not. If you have numbers to back that up, please publish them. Let's talk. Let's get to the point where we can start to talk something in the way of specifics. I'm simply finding this all a little too broad brush to get to be able to wrap my head around. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
Mayor, I was making a note to myself.
Okay.
Excuse me. Looks like I've got Dan Stern Cardinal next. Dan, are you there?
Yes. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you for having this meeting. So I want to start just by echoing what some other speakers have said, Tim, who spoke first, and what Peter said about the importance of integrating affordable housing into any developments that occur. And also what Matt Hirsch said just a few minutes ago, the big picture that this is good for Highland Park. Just in general, downtown development is the right approach for a town like Highland Park, rather than kind of the more disparate kind of over here, over there kind of patchwork approach. And the big idea that I want people to appreciate is that if we want the downtown to thrive, which I think everybody in town does, we just need to have more people, and in particular, more foot traffic in those areas. If you go back through the census numbers, Highland Park's population has been flat at about 14,000 since the 1970 census, 1970, 1980, 90, 2000, and 2010. I don't know what 2020 is going to look like, but it's been flat going back all the way to 1970. We can't freeze the town in 1970. If we try to do that, it's going to wither away. As Hava said earlier, this type of development is the alternative to a dying Main Street. Doing nothing is not an option. That's just deciding to let the town die through inaction. So I want to thank everybody for all the work that's been put into this so far. I think this is a really great start. And I hope that what we end up with is something like what we see in these preliminary kind of designs. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
That's not fair. Matt gets a hug before bed and I don't get to get one.
Sorry, you just, gotta have a bedtime.
No, I'm just jealous. So next up we have Jess Gertman. I'm unmuting you. Please state your name and address.
Hi, Jess Gertman. I'm at 123 Barnard Street, and I've lived in town since 2003, and finally bought a place last year. So this town holds a special place for me. I wanted to stay here, and I agree that it needs some work, and I'm excited that it's getting done and being thought about. Of course, I have concerns too. I know that I've lived in multiple apartment buildings throughout town, and they all seem to have vacancies. So I just don't understand in our already walkable town how all of this new development is, if we build them, they will come. But I would see that new development and having to pay for a garage space on top of that. Like, I don't understand where the draw would be. I would think that would be more expensive for people rather than less. I'm concerned about the parking garage. I could see it being a necessary evil. I would love it if we could use smaller spaces, like those smaller paid parkings throughout towns, or something like Hoboken where it's zoned parking on one side, residential, and you have to pay by a phone app for that. And we could, I worked in Hoboken, so I used to park and get parking tickets all the time. So I know that there's lots of money to come from that. I also, I would love to get more restaurants back downtown. That would be amazing. I think that would bring in more parking and more good people and more jobs. I know it's really hard to keep those kinds of businesses right now. So I'm hoping that the new development will keep that. Selfishly, if you're going to be building those beautiful 5-story buildings at the beginning of town, I'd love to see a rooftop restaurant or someplace where the residents can also enjoy the stunning views and atmosphere. And, just a lot of things that have already been said. I think that everybody really cares about this town and wants to see it succeed. I would really love it if we could come up with another name rather than the master plan, which I find a little cringy. And just being in marketing, like the naming is everything and might be a way to inspire people too. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jess.
We can blame our state legislature and their wisdom for some of the names of these tools that we have to work with, but point taken. And I think this is our 5th speaker, Mayor, unless you say otherwise. Scott Sussman, I've unmuted you.
Yes, I'm Scott Sussman.
No pressure.
I know. North Third. I just wanted to, yes, I do agree that, something needs to be done with the plan. And a lot of it is very good. But I wanted to say a couple of things. One is every picture that we saw was something that wasn't a reasonable comp to Highland Park. Then mentioned to us was Cranford and Rawway both have train stations. So again, not a reasonable comp to Highland Park. I'd like to see some things. The fact that I'm not seeing any of that makes me kind of uncomfortable, quite honestly. Like, I'd rather see things that are appropriate to us. And then next, for several years, we had huge potholes on our street and were overjoyed when the street was finally done. However, a few months later, PSE&G tore up our new street and it's not on the list to be redone, whereas all the streets around us are. I say this not to talk about paving, but because it looks like our street is an afterthought by the town. The parking garage, when you do some of the math, it looks like all the apartments listed is approximately 240 to 270 according to the plan. So if each apartment averages 1 1/3 cars, which I think is low, that would be over the 300 mark. of cars there. So that would mean people would start parking in other places, and it also takes out all the visitors coming to town, which is, you know, part of making the town being what it is. So I just don't understand how having that parking garage and looking at the math of the parking is helpful to Highland Park. Tried to be brief. And the night. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Scott. Okay, so I'm sure there are still some hands being raised. I'm going to ask those of you who did not have a chance to raise your questions to please get your questions to Terry Hobert, and we will accumulate the questions through her and get the proper people to respond to you so that you have answers to your questions. Terry's email address is tjover@hpboro.com. Am I right?
Based on the names in the list, I think I'm already in their address books, Mayor. So they should be able to find me. And also comments, just to be clear, you know, if we will share comments with the mayor and council that we receive from people as requested.
Okay. So thank you for joining us at the beginning of this journey. It was encouraging to hear so many of you in favor and understanding the importance of our downtown development. I look forward to working with all of you as we move forward in this process and ensuring that our town is the best town in Middlesex County and beyond, with a vibrant downtown that meets the needs of all our residents. Thank you all, and good night.
Good night.